This structure of apprenticeship really is a pretty potent thing. Partly I say that because that's part of my narrative. When I came to community, I was asked to become an apprentice leader in a small group. And it was through that apprenticeship in a group that we were able to take that group and multiply it into 3 different small groups through apprenticeship. And then I became a coach of those small groups and eventually came on staff as a small group director. And, it's not just Amway for Jesus. It really is something that's biblical. It's something that comes out of Jesus spending time with the disciples and investing in them and growing and multiplying the church. It comes out of Paul working with Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2. And this whole idea of apprenticeship, of investing in someone so that over time they invest in somebody else, and over time they invest in somebody else, really does create this multiplicative structure and culture where it simply just makes sense over time that everybody has the opportunity to become an apprentice if they choose to do that. And this multiplicative DNA and culture allows for ongoing multiplication and growth, which I think really has led to us becoming a multiplying church that's led to multiplying all across the globe. The apprenticeship model really is taking a risk and coming alongside of individuals and saying, hey, I see in you these things. Would you consider becoming an apprentice? That maybe over time, if we see God blessing that, and I think you're ready and you think you're ready, that you too can become a leader, is really just become a fantastic part of community's narrative. In fact, this morning before I got on this call with you, recognizing I'm 2 hours ahead, I had a meeting with my apprentice leader that has now become a small group leader at community. They've gone through the apprenticeship process. They led within our Alpha small group ministry. They've led within our men's small group ministry here in the city. They originally was somebody that I sat across the table from, and he's a corporate dude. He's a lawyer in downtown Chicago. And I had the chance to say to him, hey, Brett, I see in you these characteristics. Would you consider becoming my apprentice leader as we lead this men's groups together? And I can remember him saying, are you sure? I'm not sure I know enough about the Bible, and I'm struggling with some things about my faith. Are you sure you see these things in me? And I was able to say, yes. In fact, there's 3 things that we look for in an apprentice leader, and you have all 3 of those characteristics. And if you're a note taker, I'd suggest you write these 3 things down because I think they're universal. The first one is what we call spiritual velocity. And spiritual velocity is basically us saying out loud that we see certain characteristics within these individuals that are worth noting. And it's basically saying that they have a Jesus-centered life that's producing fruit in their faith journey. What that may mean is that on the spectrum, they may not yet be fully a Jesus follower. In other words, they've not fully admitted saying yes to Jesus. They've not translated their entire life, transferred all their life to Jesus yet. Maybe they're not even baptized in their faith journey. But you see in them that they have certain aspects of what it means to follow Jesus. Maybe they're beginning to give to the church for the first time. Maybe they're beginning to parent their kids in a way that reflects a Christ follower. Maybe they're beginning to read God's word and they're starting to apply some of the principles of what Jesus teaches in the scriptures for the first time. Maybe they're beginning to maybe even evangelize early on in their faith, and they're starting to invite people to your local church. And you're seeing them begin to serve within a local ministry. And these early fruits are what we call spiritual velocity. Sometimes we use the paradigm, if you draw a circle and you put a cross in the center of it, and that represents Jesus, that maybe for us, as we put a person in the circle, person A, we would call that person a Christ follower. And the person outside the circle, person B, is not a Christ follower. And typically we would say person A is the right person to ask to become your apprentice. And person B is not, because they're not a Christian. What I would suggest is that maybe that's not the right paradigm. But instead, go back to the circle, put the cross in the circle, put the A in the circle, put the B outside the circle. That really, if Jesus is alive, that cross that represents Jesus actually has an arrow, and that Jesus is in motion. Jesus is on mission. Jesus is active in our communities. He's in the midst. And that person A, even though they're inside the circle, may have no arrow. But person B, who's not yet a Christ follower, has an arrow. They're taking steps to follow Jesus. And the reason why I give you that analogy to help kind of push in a little bit is to suggest that really what we're looking for is not whether they're inside the circle or not, What we're looking for is spiritual velocity. We're looking for people who are taking steps in their faith journey, and for us to say out loud, hey, I see in you the capacity and the ability to lead other people spiritually in the name of Jesus, because you're starting to show fruit in your life that reflects what it means to follow Jesus. And part of the reason why I introduced that paradigm to you, okay, as we talk about what's the first characteristic in apprenticeship, and when you want to have these I see in you conversations, is that honestly, like as we're here in the city of Chicago, where it's highly unchurched, there are not a lot of Christians for me to invite into leadership. It requires me taking a risk and coming alongside of somebody and saying, I see in you the spiritual velocity that you're moving, the momentum that you're moving in the right directions towards Jesus. And I want to help you on this journey and come alongside of you, that if you would trust me, that you would follow me as I follow Jesus, as the Apostle Paul talks about, follow me as I follow Christ. And if you would go alongside of this journey with me, I will help you deepen your faith to a place where you're ready to publicly confess your faith in Jesus, and that you'll turn your life over to him fully, that in over time, you'll take on leadership in a way that leads others following Jesus. Nod your head if you're following with me. Really, what we're trying to do is to lead people to a lifelong journey of following Jesus, not of perfection, but they would fully turn their lives over to Christ. Now, certainly, we have people in our midst who are already Jesus followers, who are already Christ followers, that we're going to invite into apprenticeship. But what I wanted to kind of give you is this spectrum of what we're trying to invite people into, this kind of like ongoing faith-filled journey of spiritual velocity following Jesus. So the first characteristic we look for in apprenticeship is spiritual velocity. The second characteristic is teachability. And teachability is basically, it's not just humility. It's humility plus application. And what I mean by that is that you can have a lot of humble people in your life that are willing to receive feedback, they're willing to receive input. But the characteristic you're looking for is not just that they're willing to receive the input, it's are they willing to apply it? And that over time they become a different person. And as you look at your small groups and as you look at your teams where you're trying to infuse apprenticeship, you're really trying to look for an individual that is willing to receive input, but they're also showing growth over time. And that's that person that has this level of teachability that you want to invite into apprenticeship. And if you've seen this characteristic of teachability, you know how valuable it is. And hopefully, if you're sitting in these chairs right now, you have a characteristic of teachability. You're always willing to learn, you're willing to process, and you're willing to take those new learnings and those new processes and apply them to your life so that over time you grow in your leadership, you grow in your Jesus followership, you grow in your parenting, you grow in how you see your finances. You're always looking to be stretched to a new place of sacrifice. And it's that teachability that makes you such an incredible leader to be around. And so if you're looking for someone to become an apprentice, man, they have to be teachable. And if you know the flip side of that, when you don't have somebody who's teachable, and you've had them as an apprentice, you've had them on staff with you, you've had them in different roles, you know how frustrating it can be to not have somebody who has a teachable characteristic or a teachable trait. And so we say, in our experience, and the times that we've apprenticed people over and over and over and over and over again, it's what we would call a must-have. They have to have spiritual velocity. They have to have teachability. And then the third characteristic is relational intelligence. And relational intelligence is simply this. Do you like being with that person? I hate to oversimplify it, but it really is just about that simple. Relational intelligence is somebody that if you pull into the parking lot and you see their car, you don't want to ram it with your car, or you don't want to avoid that person and drive the other way. When you see that person's car, you can't wait to get inside and talk to them. And if you were to ask yourself, what makes me want to engage in this person with conversation, you would quickly probably start to list off the things that you like about them. And there's probably a really good reason why you like them. It's because that person has become self-aware. They know their strengths and they know their weaknesses, and they're not trying to overwhelm you with either one of them. That's relational intelligence. And there's a very good chance that everyone in this room is really likable. And that's why you have the job you have. Now, some of us have figured out how to get into these different roles without being likable. And if you have, you need to stop doing that. Because you need to model for others what relational intelligence is. And relational intelligence simply says, I know this guy over here, right? Relational intelligence is that you recognize your weaknesses and you recognize your strengths. So for example, I'm an extrovert, I'm a storyteller, and I'm a dominating personality. All right. Those can be strengths at a party. Those can be strengths in a social environment. Those can be strengths when you've been asked to speak to a group of people. But they can absolutely be killers to any kind of relationship. I can dominate conversations. I can not let the introverts speak. I can be the center of attention, whatever I want to be the center of attention. And quite honestly, we all know people who are like that, that are not self-aware, don't we? And we don't like them. Like, we don't want to spend time with them. And when we see their car in the parking lot, or if they call us on our cell phone, we click ignore, don't we? Because we're afraid we're going to get into a 30-minute conversation with them where they're talking the whole time and they're not even going to ask how I'm doing. See, someone that's self-aware and someone that has relational intelligence, that person, so I'll speak about myself again. What I've learned about myself is it's good for me to ask questions, okay, and not have to dominate. I don't need to dominate. It'd be better for me to then give everyone an opportunity to participate in this conversation so that I don't have to be the center of attention. When I'm at a party, I don't have to tell the best story. Why not say something like, hey, I want you to meet my friend Jim. He's got this great story about one time when he went to Russia. Then Jim gets to talk. And guess how Jim feels now in our friendship? He feels like it's not just about Eric all the time and his stories that he has to tell. And so somebody with relational intelligence is simply somebody that people like to be around. And they will make your best leader within your community. And we have found they're the ones who fill their small groups. They're the ones who build great teams. And you don't have to like babysit them. You don't have to help them be successful what they're going to do, because they have this kind of like, I'm not just talking about charisma or maybe even not even chemistry, that other people want to spend time with them. Teachability, spiritual velocity, relational intelligence are the three things that we find are the most important when it comes to inviting somebody into apprenticeship.
If I want to ask somebody to join my youth ministry team, am I looking at this and saying, am I trying to initiate a desire, or is this something that, like, I see somebody that desires to be in the youth ministry and then I run them through this list, or how does that, like, their willingness to serve in a certain capacity fit into what these 3 points?
Yeah, that's fair, man. I appreciate that. Thanks for asking the question. Are you thinking in regards to like, let me make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So let's say they come to you and they have a desire to serve in your ministry. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess it's, am I looking for people that, am I trying to apply this to people that have already expressed the desire to serve? Or am I looking at this, first and then trying to give them the desire to serve?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would say both. I mean, your role, I guess the way I see my role, I'll talk about myself, is that part of what I'm trying to do as I oversee the campus church that I have here in the city is that I'm trying to talent scout people who could further the Jesus mission, is how we talk about it. And so the Jesus mission is this exciting thing that I can't wait to get people kind of wrapped up in. And my role as a leader of that in this local area is to kind of have the I see and you conversations with people that I see potential in. And if I invite somebody into apprenticeship, I see enough in them to raise them up into leadership. Now, not every role within the church that I oversee is a leadership role. Like, we have tons of ways people can get involved that don't involve them overseeing people. That's how we translate leadership in our context, that if they have any kind of oversight of volunteers, then we would consider that a leadership role. So we kind of protect that leadership role to where it's not just for anybody and not just for everybody, either because the timing's not right for them or that's just not the right fit for who they are and their current story. And we try to be pretty sensitive to that. Now, we don't want to like overprotect that role, because it's like this tightrope that we try to balance, that we want to keep the leadership role really high and high expectations. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to do it if they would like. And so we try to walk that tightrope. I don't know if I answered your question or not. You want to follow up in case you have just more clarification?
No, I think it's pretty good.
Okay, cool. Anybody else want to comment or question? Yeah, I can't see everybody. Just go ahead and shut up.
You said a key word there, or a key phrase. You take on the role of talent scout. You're out looking, you're out looking for people. You look for it, you see it, you go for it.
Yeah, I think that's what Jesus did. I think Jesus was in the midst. I think he said, "Come follow me," and he's calling these guys out from their business, from their family trade, from what may have been not very good lifestyle and some of the careers they had. And he basically just said, "Hey, I see in you. Would you follow me? And we're going to build the kingdom together." And I think that, as Jesus followers, as people who are committed to God's mission, that we've been asked to do the same thing. And we have an opportunity to invite people into that. And that if we could somehow see our churches that we oversee as like talent pools for God's work. And, the other thing is too, we do use the parable of the talents analogy quite a bit in our context. If you've ever read the Message version of that, this is kind of how I challenge our people to think about it. The Message translation of the parable of the talents is really fascinating, because you get to the end of the story, and the way Eugene Peterson translates the end of Jesus' story there, the manager says about the last servant who did not invest the talents. He buried him in the sand. He says, "Get rid of this man who did not risk enough." And so part of what we teach our people at Community, and what I teach in our context, is that, we need to risk the talents that God's given us. And it may mean that we fail. It may mean that we're not successful, in terms of the world's eyes. And so I want to challenge all of you, any one of you, to take the talents that God's given you and to risk them for God's kingdom. That's what he calls us to do, is simply to risk. And it's in that risking our faith is built, our trust is built, and that's where God begins to do things that we couldn't, ask or imagine. But any other comments or questions about the must-haves?
That's good.
Okay. And I would just say that, like, for us, it's like it comes through kind of reps and exercises of doing this over and over and over and over again. But certainly it also comes with a bias towards our culture. Community Christian Church and New Thing are really built on, I don't know if you're familiar with the APEST, which comes from Ephesians 4, where Paul talks about the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. And, we're an apostle evangelist church. Like, that's our bias. Like, we have a bias towards the new, and we have a bias towards helping people find their way back to God. So as an evangelistic apostolic church, it probably makes sense that for us, our three must-haves, spiritual velocity, relational intelligence, and teachability, are really high for us. If you're a church that's more prophetic or more on the teaching shepherd side, you might find other core characteristics that are more valuable to you than those three things. And I just say that out loud just to have a teachable posture about this conversation, and to not suggest that we have all the answers and we've somehow arrived.